You're listening to Estrogen Dropouts.
Hey guys, welcome back to Estrogen Dropouts. I'm your host, Erin.
I'm your other host, Elizabeth. And today we have a childhood friend of mine on the show. She's a former gymnast and college rugby player. And Jo stepped away from athletics until her 40s when diagnosed with lupus, Hashimoto's, and Raynaud's forced her to rethink her health. During lockdown, she began lifting weights and rock climbing, eventually finding her strength and success despite ongoing flares and joint pain. In November, she sat on an ambitious new goal, which is learning to swim from scratch and learning to surf. And she is now training for her first Ironman. And I have to say, I have been so inspired following her journey since 2020. And she has been filming and documenting it all on social media. So I've watched her become, just a regular old gal till a complete beast. If you are not watching this on YouTube, she is rock solid. I mean, I don't even know if she's like an 8 or 10 pack. I don't know what. It's insane. And she's 50. So it's pretty amazing.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to share my story with you guys today.
Yeah. Well, Jo and I were talking before we started recording. I shared with her about how I was diagnosed with MS at 30. Most of our listeners know that if they've been listening for a while. And so tell us a little bit about when you were diagnosed and what did that look like for you, and how that was maybe the catalyst that kind of got you to the point where you are at now?
Yeah. So, I'm an older mom. I had my first child at 32, my second at 34. And so, now I just turned 50. And I went to follow up with my doctor, couple years after my daughter was born. I might have been like 39, 40. And they said, how you been feeling? And I said, everything hurts like always. I get out of bed. Can barely move. It takes me a while to get going. I don't feel good. I'm tired all the time. And they go, that's not normal, right? And of course, me thinking, well, I felt like this for the last 15 years. Like I always feel terrible. And they said, we need to run some blood work. And they did. And they discovered that I had, they did an ANA, which is the anti-nuclear antibody test. And they called me a week later and they said, it's positive. And of course, to me, that was devastating. I didn't really understand what a positive ANA meant. So they sent me to a rheumatologist who ran extensive blood work. You watch the little bottles fill up as they're taking your blood. And they called me and had me in and they said, you've got tons of markers for lupus. And, and I told them about my Raynaud's, like how my fingers would turn white, pink, blue, the spectrum of colors. And they said, we need to get you started on some medication. Which scared me because, I didn't know much about lupus, and everything I had read, it felt kind of like a death sentence to me. I was 40 and I was like, I can't believe that I have not been diagnosed with this at this time. So at that time, I didn't really take anything too seriously with my health. I just went on a bunch of medication, none of which made me feel better. It all made me feel worse. And then when we had a lockdown from COVID in 2020, a friend of mine who was, doing a beach body program, she said, maybe you should start exercising. You've got nothing but time. And I'm thinking, yeah, probably. So I started doing like this thing where you box in the air, and then I started lifting like weights, and I was doing like 8-pound weights, 10-pound dumbbells, thinking I was doing a great job. Did a lot of research, did a lot of studying, and I increased the weights. And that is what really turned my health around and made me feel better by lifting really heavy things and changing my entire diet so that I was really watching the amount of protein, carbs, and fats that I was intaking in order to just heal my body from the inside out. And I'm not on any medication right now, which is except for my Hashimoto's, which is not something that, you can really ignore. You have to demand some kind of thyroid supplement or medication for that. So, but overall, I feel pretty good. But there are still bad days. I still have flare-ups. I still have weeks where it hurts to get out of bed, but I do it anyway.
So you were diagnosed 39, 40, and then you didn't start until 2020. So that was like, there was like a 4-year period where you were just accepting, processing. Because your life completely changed. So what were you doing those 4 years while you were trusting the medication, just kind of living more of a sedentary or basic lifestyle? Like,
yeah. I've always been a fairly active person. Like you mentioned, growing up, I was a gymnast, all through high school. I played lacrosse, I played rugby in college. But after that, I didn't do anything consistent with exercise. I enjoyed going on hikes or I enjoyed, going on walks. And I thought that was enough. And, once I hit my mid 40s and I realized that that amount of exercise just wasn't enough, I got an Apple Watch and I wore it for 6 years. And the last 4 years I wore that watch, I closed my rings. If you guys know what Apple Watches do, they've had these little rings and I closed them every single day. And I made it this like challenge to myself to close those rings every day. I have since broken up with my Apple Watch. I got a Garmin because now that I'm training for endurance things, it's a little bit better fit for my lifestyle. So,
Yeah, I was going to say Apple Watch is good for kind of just the average user, but a Garmin, if you're like an athlete, you need a Garmin for sure. Well, so you said you kind of started in 2020 and you started kind of small. And then were you feeling results right away, or was it kind of like you were just doing it because you had nothing else to do?
pretty much that. I had joined a bouldering gym with my son who decided to quit football, or I'm sorry, baseball. And he was like 13 and he wanted to do something new. And I said, rock climbing looks really fun. Maybe we should try this little bouldering gym that's in about a half an hour away from us. And so we started doing that. And I really enjoyed that like rock climbing bit with him. And it's something I actually became very good at. And I realized that if you are doing something that you enjoy, that is a type of exercise, you don't realize you're exercising. So that was the first step, I think, is finding something that you found fun and you were challenging yourself without feeling like you're working out. And I'm going to be very honest. I don't love working out every day. I do not love lifting weights. I do not love swimming, running, and biking. I do it because I am disciplined, not necessarily motivated. And I feel that people rely on motivation to get started to do something. And once you get into that habit, you realize that you feel better. So you are disciplined to do it. You don't have to really enjoy it. But doing something that I really loved first jump started my health and my path to health to help heal myself from the inside out.
So you mentioned like lifting heavy, and I know if you guys have to check out her social media, which we'll plug it at the end, and Erin will put it in the show notes. But she documents her entire journey, and it's pretty fascinating. So you lift pretty heavy. So doing these aggressive movements, that is easing your pain. I would think that would be counterintuitive if you're living in chronic pain. I would think lifting would make it be more cumbersome and it would be harder and it would make you achier and sore. So it's the opposite is true.
It can. So, because I suffer from a disease that affects my connective tissues. Lupus is a disease that eats away your connective tissues. Essentially, your body turns on them as foreign objects and tries to destroy them. So by building up your muscles around your joints, you're essentially supporting, for me at least, I'm supporting my joints who are, there's not a whole lot I can do to stop the disease from recognizing my connective tissues as enemies. But by lifting weights, I'm supporting those muscles. And, it doesn't hurt to have big, nice muscles either. I have some women who come up to me and say, I want to know your lifting routine. And then other women come up to me and say, I don't want to lift like you because I don't want to look like that. And, for me, none of this is for cosmetic purposes. It's all for health, but it doesn't hurt to feel good and,
And that's
Sure.
crazy to me because you are a minuscule person. Like you are so tiny. Joe and I just had lunch. I mean, I don't even know if you're 100 pounds. You are tiny.
a little more than that.
Because muscle weighs more than fat. And the thing
Yeah.
about muscle is that when you have lean, dense muscles, they just become calorie burners. It's
Yeah.
like you have to, especially as we get older and we need to counteract the, maybe slowing down of our metabolism, when you have, plus we lose like 1% of muscle a year after age 25 or something. I can't remember if that's exactly the right statistic. But so when you are, because I'm a huge fan of lift heavy shit, like LHS,
Pick up heavy things. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Pick them up and put them down. I pick them up and put them down. And I mean, just for the muscle growth and keeping us as fat burning machines. We burn calories that way. But also for our bones. Our bones are need, the stress to become stronger. And as we face midlife and we start becoming, losing, not only do we not make as much bone, to like replace old bone, but we also don't take out the old bone as fast. So you're doing
Right.
so many good things for your body. And like you were saying that, with lupus, which you can stall it. You may not be able to like reverse the damage that's been done, but I bet with all of the changes that you've made, because not only are you exercising physically helping your body, but you're also working on a mental state and emotional state
Mhm.
because you're getting those good hormones, endorphins, and all of that. You may not be able to like turn back the clock on the damage that's been done prior, but you certainly can stall it from, continuing on. So I'm just curious, have you had blood work like to see if you're like maintaining what you had or like of your markers, your ANA, has it changed at all?
So I have actually, and I actually see hematologist. I was there just the other day reviewing my most recent blood work. And unfortunately, the ANA doesn't change. It's always going to be positive for me. I'm always going to have underlying disease. And some of my blood work, looks a little funny, and that's why I see a hematologist. And a lot of this stuff can be related to inflammation, and the inflammation is because of my disease. But she did determine that I needed iron infusions. And so I actually had a series of 6 IV infusions all through December and early January. And that built the iron stores up in my bone marrow. And my body has been slowly utilizing those stores. I feel a little bit less tired and less fatigued from that. So if anybody's feeling really fatigued and tired with that explanation, even though you may not look anemic on blood work, a hematologist can definitely determine if your ferritin is low for other reasons. And that's what happened to me, because she's like, you're not anemic, but you need iron. And it's most likely due to your disease. Also, we'll probably get to this, but I'm recently become an endurance athlete. And a lot of research shows that people who are endurance training actually need iron supplementation as well.
Yeah. Ferritin levels are a tricky thing because they don't usually check those unless you specifically, I have had to specifically ask, I want you to check my ferritin levels.
And so,
Because
what exactly is that, Erin? Explain what the
well,
ferritin.
ferritin is just that's iron that's stored in your bone marrow, and your body will sequester ferritin if you do have an active infection. So a lot of times people, if they have anything going on in their body will sequester iron as ferritin to keep it from, because iron actually can feed infections. Now, not
Mhm.
autoimmune is different, like lupus is autoimmune. My youngest son has been tested positive for lupus as well. I've done a lot of research on lupus. Um, but a lot of times in women, we do have low ferritin levels, and it will on our regular, like a CBC and just basic chem profile. And when they check your hematocrit, hemoglobin, all that, you won't look like you have low iron, but you do technically. So getting iron infusions is really the only way because you can't absorb enough through your stomach, through your gut.
Right.
And it causes all kinds of bad side effects, like you get constipated when you take iron supplements.
Yeah. That's the main reason they did the IV for me as well, because I didn't want all those bad side effects from the oral
Yeah, well,
iron.
as an athlete, you're like, listen, people, I got to poop. I can't work to pay.
That's the number one rule before you run. You got to make sure
Exactly.
you
I
go.
run a lot. He came home oftentimes with one sock missing because he would end up like pooping on the run.
I hear that is, I've seen videos of that on TikTok, and I'm like, what? Because I've never run. So I'm like, I don't understand what you people are talking about. But they say that it's common for runners to like poop in the woods and stuff because you like all
Yeah.
of a sudden you just have to go
Mm.
and you can't hold it. Is that real? That's real?
Yeah, it's real.
I've never been an endurance runner, so don't ask me like for endurance. But I mean, I just know from when my husband would go on long runs back when he was a ranger and he would come home with one sock missing. So, because he'd use it to wipe his bottom in the woods.
Wow.
But so tell us about endurance athlete. Like, I know I've heard that term. Like, what does that technically mean when you say endurance athlete?
So for me, I think endurance athletes are anybody who does something that is a long-term type of thing, like cycling, like endurance cycling, endurance running, endurance swimming. Those are the three I'm most familiar with. And, when I have never been an endurance athlete. I was a sprinter in college for rugby. I was a sprinter when I played lacrosse in high school. When I was a gymnast, I loved vault and floor because I like those big, powerful things. When I rock climb, I'm really good at like the big, powerful moves. I'm getting better at the little balancy things, but I really like that big burst of energy. But when you're doing something like running 10 miles or running a marathon, you have to maintain a certain level for a certain period of time and a certain rate, as you're executing these tasks. So it's been a huge shift for me to do this type of exercise versus what I've always done. And I'm doing it because I can. And I'm doing it because I like a challenge. And, I decided it was time. I love climbing, but I didn't want that to be the only thing that I was good at and knew how to do. So this kind of fell in my lap over the last like 6 months. And I decided to learn to swim, um, which has been the absolute hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. As an adult, I mean, my swim teacher who taught my kids how to swim, she goes, "Okay, let's see you swim a lap across the pool." And I looked at her and I said, "I can't put my face in the water." She's like, "Let's start there." So
So
we
this
started with my face in the water. This is back in September, October. And I have been going to the pool and dragging my butt to the pool at 6 a.m. 3 times a week, whether I've slept or not. And I hate it every time I go in. I was there this morning. I swam 2,000 yards. I did my prescribed training. I got home and I was like, okay, gotta be positive and tell myself that I love this. I still don't love it.
So can you talk about how, because I think women particularly will struggle with so many different aspects of this, creating the time for themselves, spending the money, the investment on themselves, giving themselves permission to step away from the family to put energy into themselves. But also, like, what about the piece you talk about this on social media a lot of doing it alone, like without a partner to go with you to try these new
Uh-huh.
experiences that you are not comfortable with, that you are stepping out of your, like, the mental challenge and the mental load, like, does that weigh in your mind for months before you actually do it? Like, you're talking yourself into it, or do you feel like you get this idea in your mind because you have learned how to surf, how to skateboard, how to, like, you guys, you have to see your social media. She does all kinds of, like, I want to say crazy things, but like, not, it's not really crazy, just athletic things that she just tries for the first time. Like, do you just get this idea and you immediately do it, or do you have to sit there and wrestle with yourself, like, oh, I'm gonna be awkward, I'm gonna go by myself, I'm gonna, like, how does that look?
So, yeah, that's a loaded question. I'm a person who really enjoys learning new things. I've discovered this in the last 5 years. This has not always been the way. I've always been huge self-doubter, very self-conscious. I know it probably doesn't look like that on my social media, but like I've always had body issues. I've always not liked how I looked. I've always had, myself. And over the last few years, I decided enough's enough and I need to go take some risks. And it all started in 2023. I flew down to Mexico with a women's retreat called She Moves Mountains, and it was a rock climbing retreat. And I flew down to Mexico and I climbed with 20 strangers for an entire week. I was a brand new climber on lead climbing, which is where you clip as you climb. And we were doing had never climbed a multi-pitch route before. And it was a life-changing week for me. And I think since that point, I've given myself permission to go do new things. I've gone to Costa Rica alone. I went there in February to a surf camp. This is like 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And I spent an entire week there. I met the most amazing people. So this solo travel has been really, really good for me. I think as women, and especially I have two teens. So I have an 18-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. And giving myself permission to go leave the house and go away for a week or go away for a weekend and camp and climb or go surfing. I'm going surfing in Assateague Island in 2 weeks from now. I just booked a campsite and a friend of mine's going to go and meet me there and we're going to go surfing for the weekend. I'm terrible at surfing, but I like it. So, I want to go because I want to keep up my skills. And I think when
But you started alone on most of these things. So
Mhm.
yeah, like you started obviously on the retreats alone. Now you've made friends through this
Right.
and you're doing the surfing. But like even the daily, like the swimming, you showed up by yourself. You didn't
Yeah.
have a girlfriend that was
And
like, let's go learn to swim together. Like you made that decision and did it yourself.
yeah, same with running and biking. It's live pretty rural and it's hard to find other, especially women in my age bracket. So they don't necessarily need to be in my age bracket, but primarily like in their 40s or 50s. I've had a really hard time finding people who are interested in doing these things that I like to do. It's been a good thing because I've been able to rely on myself and learn to do these things alone. Sometimes it does get lonely, I won't lie, but I've made friends. I've made friends who will go with me. Like this weekend, I'm doing a triathlon on Saturday, and a girl who lives in my town, she's in her late 30s, but she's super rad. We're going to go down together and we're going to do the race together. So it's pretty cool that I have like that, but then I always remember I'm like, man, I'm like 15 years older than everybody around me doing these things. So, I mom mode sometimes pops into my head and I want to like take care of everybody and make sure everybody has snacks. And do you have your coffee? And can I get you something? But I have to remember that like I need to let other people take care of me too. And that is a hard part for me,
Well, I
reverting to that
love
role.
though that you just, it's like you didn't wait for, first off, to have somebody to do it with, but also that you've given yourself permission to try new things that you're going to be bad at. And I think
Yeah.
that is the like kind of the tipping point is that oftentimes we've spent, maybe our 20s and 30s and even maybe into our 40s where we want to be good at before we do something. We want to be proficient at it. We don't want to fail. We don't want to fall on our butts. We don't or our faces. And I love that you have just said, you know what, screw it. I mean, I'm probably going to suck at it, but who cares? Like you went on a retreat with a bunch of climbers that probably were like you were a novice. They might have been way better than you, but you still showed up. So talk about that. Like, do you just have the mindset that like I'm going to show up regardless? I mean, I know you said you have some, confidence issues, but like, what is it that has allowed you to do that? Like, like, is it just like you're just like something inside of you that you've just had to grasp hold of?
It is. As I look at my, like, where my life has been and where I potentially can go, I'm 50. I could live 50 more years. I hope. I hope I do. And, I will backtrack with that because a lot of people look at me and they go, Joe, what are you training for? And my answer is old age because I do not want to be the person who's 80 and cannot get up off the floor without using my hands or help or using a walker. And when I was diagnosed with my disease, like I said before, I looked at it kind of like it's a death sentence and that like, oh no, I could be in a wheelchair in 10 years and I got to fit all this stuff in. And that's how I honestly started with going to the climbing retreat. I was like, if I don't do this now, I might never be able to do it. I might never get this chance again. I might be too sick. And as the years have gone on, I'm not too sick. I'm actually improving because my happiness and my lifestyle and the things that I want to do are fulfilling to me. And my kids look at me and they say to me, Mom, that's cool. Like that's so cool. We're proud of you. And I think women in particular think that we have to pour into everybody else's cup. And that's what I did for 40 years. I poured into everybody else and never poured into mine. And it became kind of like time for me to like turn the tables on that a little bit and recognize that I needed to fulfill myself as well. And yeah, I'm a horrible surfer. I will fully admit it. I'm terrible at skateboarding. I'm going to keep at it. I don't expect to ever be super good, but but I enjoy the challenge. And I think when you find something that you can kind of like look forward to doing. So I'm booking a surf trip again next February with some of the people I met at that surf camp. I'm going to go back for a week and I'm looking forward to that. And that's almost in a year. And,
Well, I
give
want to
me that.
just say one thing is that I do handstands every single day for the last 14 years. And I've had people say, like, what are you doing that for? Like, why? And it's like, I'm not like working towards like a particular goal. Like, it's not like the goal is not the handstand. It's just doing, first off, you were talking about motivation versus discipline. Like there are many days I don't feel like doing it. But it's like I'm doing it because I can. And like I want to stay, like you said, I want to be able to pick myself up off of the floor when I'm 80. I still want to be going upside down when I'm 80. Like I might,
Good.
have to like walk my feet up the wall at that point. I might not be able to kick up. And so I think that's what so many people, just don't understand is that, that idea of doing something that it's not necessarily that you have an end goal in sight. You're doing
Right.
it for just the experience daily.
Yeah.
So a question about like diet. I'm curious how this went for you to see if this is like a popular human experience with this. But for years, I struggled with my diet. And then when I stopped focusing on the food I was consuming and I started shifting it to moving my body, I felt like the food fell in line when I focused more on getting my steps in and making a physical goal. Then I felt like then after that became a discipline for me and it became natural for me to walk like 3 or 4 miles a day. Then all of a sudden it was like, now I don't want the cookies or something because I'm doing this. So it kind of works together. That was like the easiest for me. But you did mention you changed your diet. Did you do that before you started exercising, after? And what does your diet look like now?
It was kind of in line with it. And, I will admit to this that when I started lifting, I ended up tracking every single thing that went into my mouth. And I tracked every calorie I ate, every ounce of fat, carbs, protein. And then I was like, oh, well, I'm over 40 and I need to eat my body weight in protein every day. So I was eating 105 or more grams of protein every single day. But then I was scared about the carbs and, all this stuff and social media influences like, if you're 50 and you're going to eat all these carbs, you're going to have belly fat and all this stuff. So I got very, very neurotic about everything that I was eating. And then I realized that it was causing a really bad relationship with food, even though my diet, I will tell you, was perfect. If you want to define a perfect diet, it was the perfect macros, perfect carbs, perfect protein, nothing processed, tons of fruits and vegetables, tons of leafy greens, all the things you're supposed to be doing, super clean, no dairy, no gluten, trying to like turn my health around. And then I realized that I was not being forgiving to myself and allowing myself to have that piece of cake at someone's birthday party and not allowing myself to have those chips if I wanted them. And then I would end up starving at night and then eating a huge bag of like kettle corn, which is like a huge weakness for me. And, so since I started all this endurance training, which is very new to me, I have eaten more white rice, white bread, jelly, bananas, applesauce that I would ever eat. I would never touch that stuff. And then I realized like our bodies require certain things based on our activity. And I don't count calories or anything at all anymore. I kind of do it by feel. Last night I had 2 cookies before I went to bed. Normally I wouldn't do that, but I was like, what? I want these cookies and I'm going to eat them because if I don't, tomorrow morning, I'm going to eat this entire. So you got to give yourself permission to live a little. You can't always be, so disciplined that you're not having fun. And food's fun, I'm a huge baker. I love to bake. I bake everybody birthday cakes, bake cookies all the time. And you just have to be like mindful without being so strict that you're limiting yourself. So, but no, but to answer your question, my diet is very good. I definitely get.
And you don't drink alcohol. You don't you're
No.
pretty. So what you're saying is you give yourself grace when you're craving something or you
Mhm.
want a sweet, but that is not like a normal part of, I think if you invest so much into your physical routines and work, you don't want to blow it all by eating a bag of cookies.
Yeah.
So it's easier probably to limit them to just 2 than a whole bunch after.
But listen, I have been guilty of eating a whole sleeve of Oreos in the and you just got to say, oh, well, it was that was a rough day. Tomorrow's a new day. And you got to just, you're not going to gain 10 pounds by overeating or overindulging a few times. Like that's just not how it works, you know. As long as you're generally healthy, you have that permission to eat what you want. You know, sugar doesn't make my joints feel do I still love sugar? Yes, I do. I love sugar. I have a huge sweet tooth. You know, chocolate cake is my weakness, you know.
Well, I think that is having that relationship with food, looking at it as fuel, and nothing is bad and nothing is like completely off limits. Because I think when I was diagnosed with MS at 30 and I got really strict about my food and no sugar, no dairy, and then I ended up at 44 diagnosed with breast cancer. I was like, what the hell? Like, I eat so clean. I mean, I've never drank alcohol. And my teacher at the time, that my yoga where I worked at, and she was kind of what I consider my yoga mentor. She said, it's not what you eat. It's the intention behind it. It's the feeling behind it, because I was eating to like keep away. Like I was like, I don't eat sugar because it's bad for my MS. Instead of saying like, I eat, to give my body fuel. Like, and so I changed my relationship with how I viewed what I ate rather than thinking of anything as like bad and off limits. And so sounds like you've probably kind of gotten to that point where you're like, you try to prioritize, eating protein, eating good carbs, eating vegetables, but you're like, at the end of the day, if I want to have a cookie, I'm going to have a cookie.
Exactly.
It's like you got to have that balance. Well, tell us a little bit about, so how do you navigate the intense training that you do when you're dealing with, maybe lupus flares or joint pain, fatigue, any of that kind of stuff? Like, what is it that helps you deal with all of that as you train?
That's, I'm still navigating it. I'm still kind of working it all out and figuring out. I started this journey in November. So it's been what, 5 months, 6 months that I decided, once I decided I'd like to start swimming and learn to swim as just a goal. And then I bought a bike and I was like, I'm going to ride a bike. And then I started running and I said, what am I doing? I guess I should be sign up for triathlon because that's what these three disciplines are. And there are mornings. I know this morning was one of them. I don't sleep well. I'm 50. I'm on HRT. I'm on estrogen patch, progesterone at night, and testosterone cream in the morning, along with my medication for my thyroid. And I take a bunch of supplements, and I didn't sleep again. I slept 6 hours. It's not enough. We all know that's not enough sleep. And I was like, and I look at my training plan and I said, I don't want to go to the pool, but I have to be on work at 7 because I had log in at 7 o'clock for work. So what I did was I got up and I went to the pool. I told myself, what's your excuse going to be later today if you don't do it now? And if I don't do it, I'm going to not swim well this weekend, which I can talk a little bit about. My failed triathlon attempt last weekend I have a bit of a story behind that, but I made myself go. And, my lower back hurts. I have a shoulder injury. I mean, I have a bunch of little injuries and nags and things that bother me throughout my body. But, when you're dealing with a disease like this, or just, training injuries or overuse injuries, you either have to work with them or work through them, but you don't let them win. And you can adjust what you're doing to accommodate for those things. Like today, I lifted weights for a little bit, but I skipped a couple of my exercises because my shoulder was hurting. So I didn't finish my full weight training exercise. I just did like half of it, but that's good enough because I did something, and something's better than I showed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how this is going to be like changing your mental, you must emotionally and mentally feel like a completely different person because you're showing up for yourself. So it's like a different level of, I imagine, respect, empowerment, courage, like bravery to take on the world. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, you can make an excuse why something isn't going to work for you, or you can just do the thing. I have this thing that I have on the cover page of my phone. It says, stop negotiating with yourself. If you already know what needs doing, go do it. And I have that, like when I unlock my phone, that's the first thing I see on my screen, because you can negotiate your way in or out of anything that you don't want to do. I recognize that not everybody wants to do like 5 different activities all at once, especially busy moms. I am a busy mom. I have a life outside of being a mom. Unfortunately, if you start triathlon, your whole life becomes a triathlon until your races are over. I've discovered this has been like a very interesting, eye-opening experience on how much training I'm doing. You're tired. All you do is exercise, eat,
And
and
sleep.
sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the last triathlon. You said you had a story to share
Oh
about
boy.
that.
Yeah. So I signed up for 3. I signed up for a sprint triathlon last weekend. I had signed up for that one. And then this one this coming Saturday, which is called an Olympic distance. And then I have a half Ironman in July is the race. That's like the ultimate race. And that was the kind of going to be the race of all races that my end goal is that one, to do that one really well. And the sprint is a 400-meter swim, which I warm up with in the pool now. I never thought I'd say I could do that, but I do. And then it's a 12-mile bike ride, which is zero problem for me, and a 5K, which is a 3.1-mile run. And I got in that water last weekend and I swam 50 yards and I had a panic attack and I was freezing. And I've never had a panic attack in my entire 50 years of life. I couldn't breathe. My wetsuit felt like it was choking me. I pulled my goggles off. I flagged a boat down. They boated over. I hung on to it. I tried to swim to the first buoy, had to grab a paddleboard, and I was the last one out of the water. They had to boat me in. And I was the only one who didn't complete that part of the race. I was really sad. I was pretty mortified. I'd been training so hard. I learned to swim for this, thinking that last weekend sprint was going to be just a walk in the park, a practice for this coming weekend, 2 days from now, for my Olympic. And so they let me get on the bike. I passed half the people who got out of the water 15 minutes before me on the bike, but I froze and I was so cold and my body wouldn't adapt to the panic and the cold. And I got off the bike and I tried to run and I fell and I busted up my knee and my feet were white from the Raynaud's and I couldn't move. And I got a DNF, which stands for did not finish. And
And you were physically carried out of there.
I was so humbling, very eye-opening experience. So my race in 2 days, the swim is 5 times longer than the one I didn't complete. And that is where I have to get my mindset right. And I have been doing a lot of like visualization, breathing drills on land to get myself ready for this. I have to tell myself, I know it's going to suck. It's not going to be fun. I can enjoy the swim, but my friend and her husband told me that the swim is just transportation to the next part of the race, and that's how I have to look at it. That really helps me. So I'll keep you guys posted after this Saturday because it's a 1,500-meter swim. It's a 26-mile bike ride, and it's a 10K, which is a 6.2-mile run.
But you know what? I think that's what this whole conversation is kind of leading us to, is that all of this is mindset. It's like, yes, you are in great physical condition. And I'm not saying like I wouldn't be able to do it because I haven't trained physically for it. But I think it's like when you can have the mindset of, you could be in the best physical shape and have a terrible mindset and you're still probably not going to finish, because so much of our power lies in our mind. And so, like you said, visualizing, like, see you completing it. Like you're going to like get in that water. You're like, all this is doing is getting me from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Because when I get out at point B, that's when I'm going to get on the bike and that's where I rock and roll. I'm sure. I mean, and I say this as somebody who's staying on land this weekend. And it's not lost on me. Swimming is not something. I was a swimmer that as a kid, I grew up in Florida. We swam underwater. Like like back in the 70s, we didn't have like swim lessons like they do now. Your kids can be in, swim team and all that, and they learn all the strokes. I swim underwater like a fish, so I've tried to learn to swim on top of water, whatever it's called. Is it freestyle? Is that what it is? Yeah. It's so hard to coordinate everything. You're breathing, you're turning your head, you're like, so, I mean, but like he said, it's just transportation. You're just it's getting you to the next step. So I have no doubt that you're going to do great.
I hope so, but I'm not
No,
going to
you
put
got
too
to
much
believe
pressure
it.
on
You are.
myself. Yeah.
You got to like speak it into existence.
Well, Joe, if you could give our listeners like one piece of advice for women who have been holding themselves back mentally from trying something new in life, whether it be a physical challenge or something else, what is your advice for them?
I think the best thing to remember is that you have to give yourself permission to live the life that you desire. If you give yourself permission, you can take it one step at a time. There is time. Everybody says they don't have time. Trust me, I work full time and I work part time on the side in photography, and I have 2 kids and a home to manage. And, there is time. You have to find it, and you have to give yourself permission to do the thing, because the hardest part is starting and making it a goal for yourself, to any goal, whether that's a hobby you've been wanting to pick up. Set small goals for yourself along the way. And once you tick one of those off, set your next one. I'm not like a vision board person. I don't journal. I wish I was more in touch with doing those things. But if I was somebody who did that, I would be writing these things down as something that I look forward to. But because I've signed up for these races and I've paid a lot of money to do this, that is my motivation and my next goal and my next step. So,
Yeah.
but giving yourself grace and patience and allowing yourself to slip up, allowing yourself not to be good right away, which is something I had a really hard time with, and not being really good at something the first time you do it, and allowing yourself to embrace the suck and realize that, and if it's not something that you loved doing, at least you tried it. At least you gave yourself the chance to try it. I tell my kids all the time, if somebody offers you something cool to do, always take the opportunity to do it, because even if you don't think you're going to like it, you may never get that chance again. So take it when you can.
That's awesome. Well, tell our listeners where they can find you.
So on Instagram, my handle is landlocked mama with a period in between. That's my public account. So if they want to follow along, I have, I'm pretty frank and honest about my journey. You can watch videos of me wiping out in Costa Rica about 100 times in a reel, and follow along with my triathlon journey and my swimming journey and the rock climbing things. And, if anybody ever wants to join me in the Northern Virginia area, I'm always here. Just reach out to me. I'd be happy to show people the literal ropes if they're interested.
That's awesome. Well, we are so appreciative for you sharing your story. We want to tell our listeners that if they haven't hit the follow button on the podcast, that to do that so that they can stay in the loop whenever we release a new episode.
And you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and watch full versions of this on YouTube. And we will see you next week. Thanks, Joe, for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
This has been a production of Estrogen Dropouts, LLC.